Thanks, Matt, and thanks for all of you out there joining, even if it's present or in the past, in the future. Excuse me. So Sharon Belto, as you mentioned, I've been started Tiger Retail almost 5 years ago, and honestly, I did it out of my love for selling. So you probably think I'm a foodie when I tell you my background. I spent most of my career with Coca Cola and then also Gallo Wines. So a lot of beverages, I guess, and then some in coffee. So I have had the pleasure of being specific to Walmart in Bentonville for the last 20 years. And again, out of my love for just after 30 years in this business, selling with the big guys and then now working with smaller folks, I've got a lot of passion for this topic, as I told Matt. So, a lot of people, I did my little David and Goliath photo here because I'm sure this is how, if you're with a small company, this is how you often feel. If you're going up against, a P&G or Coca Cola or Kellogg or any of the really big guys. But what I have found, and with really just about all of the major retailers I worked with, they really, really like and prefer to work with the smaller guys. So they like the Davids. And so what I'd like to do is kind of walk you through a little bit about what some of my experiences, what I have found, and based on my experiences, for good, better, or worse, you learn a lot. I mean, you learn the most from your mistakes, right? So given that, I have a wealth of knowledge, given I've made a lot of mistakes in the past. But this is a topic that is going to be near and dear to my heart because of the pleasure I've had for the last 5 years working with the smaller companies, being on a different side than when working with the big guys. So with that, I just want to jump right in. So, how does David beat Goliath? And it's really about leveraging your size. And there's a lot of, I like to put these in 4 big buckets. So you got buyers, wants, and needs. We're going to talk about the shopper. We're going to talk about the competitive landscape. And then the listen, learn, and flexible, which a lot of focus on the flexible piece. But I really feel that in my experience, there is no question that if we talk through these things today, if you can really walk away with 1 or 2 things in each of these buckets and really practice them, kind of walk the talk, you will become your buyer's friend. So with that being said, let me just jump right into the buyer's wants and needs. I think I'm missing a slide here, but they're out of order. Okay, here we go. The buyer wants and needs. So let's talk about what that is. Okay, so one of the things that when you are selling your product to a retailer, the most important thing, and you all know this, when you started off, when you developed your company vision and your strategy and your products, it was all based on a consumer that would want this product, right? All based on the need that's out there, or the want that's out there with your product. So again, you didn't develop it because you had the capacity to do it or the equipment to do it. It all kind of started in order to be sustainable and successful. It also had to start with, is there a need out in the marketplace? And if there's a need in the marketplace, that's why I kind of put down at the bottom where it says, your buyer needs and your products. There's that sweet spot right there. And I would say when you're having any conversation with any buyer, with any company, but especially I've seen a lot with the bigger retailers, when they get it, it's all about the consumer, what the consumer wants, and then how they put that with what their needs are. And there's obviously very different levels of needs, right? But it's what their needs want. And then you're going to find out, okay, I know that there's a need out there from a consumer perspective. And I know my buyer sees that and wants it as well. So I can merge the two together. I'm going to take my product to help meet that need. So at the end of the day, I think the biggest mistake sometimes small companies make is you're not going to have millions of dollars to go buy IRI data and Nielsen data or hire all these top paid consultants to provide all this marketplace data for you. And that's okay. I mean, that really is, that's okay. It's great if you have it. But if you don't, it's a matter of just getting into the market and getting into the market and taking pictures of the set and looking at the prices of the set, looking at the competitors, where the competitors are priced, for example. Um, and then when you putting that go-to-market strategy together based on all of that, when you're really focused on, okay, this goes down to, we know the consumer wants my product, and I'm going to use the example today of a healthy bar, like a snack bar, and we know the consumers today want more around all natural. Some even like organic, although organic is still can be very expensive, but they really like, you're seeing the vegan thing. So when we just know in the marketplace that there's a need out there for that, we can walk into a Walmart and see if, wow, they don't really have a lot of all natural bars. So that's an example where, okay, my bar is all natural and it happens to be vegan as well. So I think I can fill a void that this particular retailer has. So it's as simple as that, is understanding by looking at the shelf, or if you do have access to the IRI and the Nielsen data, really great to look at that. So that being said, I'm going to toggle my screen for a moment because I'd like to share with you an example of when you do have that data, and even if you don't, how you're going to look at that to understand. So I'm going to toggle here for a moment. Okay. All right, I'm going to go back and make sure you can see my screen. Let's see. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen here. And you can see that looking at an example of some IRI data, again, if you were looking at the shelves, that'd be fine. If you're looking at this data, great. If you're not, you can look at the shelves. But what am I looking for to make sure that I'm determining where the need may be? Okay, so keep in mind too that when we think about buyers' needs, it's not always about, I want to sell. It's always going to be about, I want to sell more stuff, right? But it's not about cannibalizing their own. So to sell more stuff, they have to grow the overall category. And when you talk to any buyer, at the end of the day, what they're accountable for, what's going to make them successful, is, does your product help them grow the overall category? And there's several ways you can do that, right? I mean, you can grow the overall category by bringing new entrants into the category. Maybe you've got some fancy new health bar or snack chip that they currently don't have, and it's maybe a higher end that maybe before it's not. He doesn't really attract this category, and this retailer doesn't really attract that kind of shopper because it doesn't offer anything like that. So if I'm that consumer for this category, I may go shop at a competitor. So maybe my story and my product is going to fill a need that says, hey, I can bring new people to your category that weren't shopping before. And so that will help grow your overall category. The other way to do it is, how do I get them to either trade them up, where they go from, let's say, an inexpensive, a Nature Valley bar to a Cliff bar, for example, at a 73 cents a ring versus $1.63 a ring, right? So if they're substituting for something higher price, absolutely that drives the other category. And then the third thing we think about, we drive the other category is it totally incremental? So maybe this mom buys Nature Valley for the kids to put in their lunch boxes all the time. But then mom says, but I'd like something for me when I get back from the gym and I want it to be vegan, or I care about the fact that it's compostable and wrapping and it's all natural. So I'm going to pick a few up of these MetRx big colossal bars. And it's going to be a lot more expensive, right? It's going to be 2-3 times the price of the other bars are, but it's a different occasion. So, you're building the basket, or you're either making the basket size ring bigger, or you're bringing new people into the category. But at the end of the day, it's got to all be about one of those things. So when you're in the store and you're looking at a particular, let's say Walmart example here, you're going to look at all the different flavors sell. So, gee, do I have a unique flavor that maybe he doesn't sell? And what is selling off the shelf? And again, if you're looking at IRI data, you know what's driving growth in the category, and you can see more where the gaps are. But if you're at a reach store and you're just looking at it, you can certainly see, depending on how many facings of a product is in a store, how much space it dominates, because all the retailers are going to do things space to sales. So the more you sell, so you can make some assumptions just by looking at the shelf. All right, so I'm going to toggle back. Okay, I'm going to toggle back to my slide. So we talked about this, about the new entrants in the bigger category. And then the thing I do want to call out here is the second bullet about you don't ever want to bring a me too. So you may think your product tastes better than everybody else's, and it may be this, be that. But if you can't convince the consumer that it does, and it's just he or she's replacing one bar with another, that doesn't drive incremental growth through the basket ring of those things we talked about, then you've not really found a need the buyer has. So the second thing is really all about, too, when you talk the buyer's wants and needs. And this is specific to just about any retailer, but especially with a Walmart or a Target or the club channel. You can't go talk to any of these retailers without talking about price leadership, price value leadership. And so literally, I'm going to toggle over to another slide here and show you an example. When I've, for example, have given presentations to Walmart, and I probably do 2-3 dozen a year. Let me toggle back. One of the things that I will always say, the very last and most important page of any presentation is going to be able to show what is an example. The value per bar here, let's say, is $1.96. And this ROM, rest of market, at $2.79. Because what a buyer wants to see is two things. The first thing their eyes are going to go to is, number one, at the cost this person's giving it to me, and what I need from my margin. If I mark that up, I'm going to have to sell it for a little under $2. Can I sell at that price and still have the best price in the marketplace? So again, if you're not in mass or you're not in club, it's not going to be quite as important, but they're going to want to know what the rest of the market is selling their price at, because even if they don't want to be under there, they certainly don't want to be much higher than everybody else in the marketplace. So you always have to keep being cognizant of a need the buyer has. Is not only is he responsible for growing the category, but he's got to grow it in a profitable way. So the buyer is also responsible for this margin percent, right? So the one thing I'll also tell you that I see a lot of people make a mistake as, and I certainly did in my day. I remember, gosh, probably 15 years ago, when I was with Coca Cola, we were trying to convince them to go with an item that, quite frankly, none of us loved, but of course it was our job to go sell it in. And we went in there deciding that, hey, you know what? Granted, the price is not that great, the value's not that great, but what if we offer them a huge margin, like 25% more than what his average margin is on the category? And you know what the first thing the buyer said to us was, come on, Sharon, you know better than that. I'm not going to buy an item that's based on my margin. It's always based on what the shopper wants. And I keep that in my mind all the time because it's so true. So where margin's important, that it's got to be acceptable margin, it's not why the buyer is going to buy your product. And so use that, with what I found with smaller companies is a lot of times you've got some flexibility to say, for example, I had one client the other day that does loaves and sweet loaves. And we went in where the marketplace was. And the buyer particularly said, I really, really, they will never say, I want you to give me a better cost. What they will say is, I don't think I can sell your product at that retail. I think that retail's too high. Well, granted, it does translate to cost, right? Because they do need to make an acceptable margin. But oftentimes you can say, look, let me go back and see if I can find some cost savings with my packaging supplier. Let me go see if I can find some cost savings with some of my ingredients. Or hey, Walmart, if you could agree to a certain level of product of stores I can get in where I can get my buys up from my suppliers, then I can maybe get a better cost on those and get those down. So that's the kind of dialogue that you can have. Whereas bigger companies, they're locked and loaded. They don't have any flexibility to go in and really negotiate that way, but you do. And that's going to go back to one of the things I'm going to close with today. It's why the listening and trying to be responsive is so, so important versus if you're one of the big guys where you have to go in, you've got your little sales book and you've got your marching orders, you've got your cost, and that's it. That's it. So there is room to go in there and talk about, okay, how do I get to a better price point? And quite frankly, this one particular story that recently happened with the Lowe's, we went from hoping to get 300-400 stores to getting total system-wide because we were able to go out and cut some cost out and get to a retail, not that it was, granted, is better than the marketplace, but it was really about where the buyer thought, I just don't, you're coming in at, let's say my average ring was $348 and you're coming in saying you have to be at $798. I'm not going to be able to trade that consumer up that far. So the conversation was about beating our heads in to say, go back and get me a lower cost. It was really about, I love that product, but I don't know if I can convince my shopper. Again, going back to it's all about the consumer. I don't think I can convince my consumer to trade up that much high. So if there's a way we can get your cost down, and there's lots of ways to do that, right? If you've already exhausted all of your resources that go into the product, one thing you're seeing a lot in the marketplace is people are making smaller, right? So maybe instead of having a 12-ounce loaf, maybe we'll make a 10-ounce loaf. And let's go back to our supply chain people and find out that if by putting less ingredients in the package. And of course, like I said, since COVID and cost of going up, I think most of you, I'm sure, have seen or heard about that packages are getting smaller. So again, those are just examples of ways that you can meet the need by making sure that you understand going in what is your retail and how does it compete with the rest of the market. So now I'm going to toggle back to our slide. Okay. And then thirdly, I want to touch on here, and then we'll move on to the innovation pipeline for sustainable growth. Real important, again, in your business, when the Walmart buyer says to you, hey, look, I love this bag of nuts you're bringing me, but it's going to get lost on the shelf. And I hear this all the time because they have one SKU. And they'll say, could you bring me another SKU? Yeah, well, let me see. What do you want? How about a flavor? How about a peppercorn or a sriracha flavor? Those are real big right now. Great. Let me go back and see what's in our pipeline and make sure you're bringing an offering that says, here's what I have today, but we have this in the pipeline coming down the road 6 months from now or a year from now, or let me see if I can move up that timing. But kind of knowing and understanding what your pipeline looks like. And like I said, with a smaller company, it's easier to do that. Some of the larger companies may have things in the pipeline, but their timelines are not flexible. Where oftentimes if Walmart says, hey, if you could move this timeline up and make this, let's say it's a Kroger's, any of a large customer, it may be worth your while and the expense to go ahead and make that happen. All right, so next thing I'm going to go to is let's talk about the shopper. So this one we talked about, the shopper has to be the center of the universe. We already talked a lot about this, about understanding the consumer's trends and insights. I'm gonna go back to, again, you may not have to have millions of dollars to go in and have done a lot of research, but you know what you can do, and I've done this, is wonderful thing called the internet today, or Google. You can go in and Google a lot of insights today. You don't have to go way down deep at all, and you can take that to your advantage because, granted, the P&Gs and the Cokes of the world are always going to show up with a deck this big of all these big insights of why the consumer wants this, that, and the other thing. It is totally good for you to say, hey, we've gotten feedback from our shoppers online that have said this and that. That is just as valid today. Use what you know. Use what you've learned from your shoppers. May they be your online shoppers. May they be your experiences you've had in the stores, and certainly from your own sales internally, what you've seen as far as trends. and where's your product selling, and where it sells well, why is that? How many SKUs do you have? So those are all very valuable insights. And again, you don't have to have all this money to go invest in these big decks, because when you go into a lot of these retailers, trust me when I say, um, working with smaller retailers the last 5 years, we don't go in with those. I have not had one client that had all these deep insights. They have some insights around their product, their category. They did that, so they were developing it. For the most part, though, they're going in there with the passion, the knowledge of their product and how it's been selling, or why they know it's going to be, why it's going to work, and that's why they developed it. And so, because at the end of the day, the buyers usually already have seen and already know that material. So don't let that intimidate you. Don't let you think just because Gallo brings all these insights around the wine business, and from every varietal to grape on who's buying it, what demographic. At the end of the day, that's really not what's going to sell them on your product. So you can use that to your advantage and go in and have a conversation. I mean, true story, about 10 years ago, one of my favorite, he was a buyer at Sam's Club, and we got to be friends because a lot of times when, buyers are so busy, they don't answer their emails, right? Have you all seen that before? Oh, yeah. So they don't answer their emails. You can't call them anymore on their phones. And it's like, I just want to get this in front of them. So I used to be called the stalker because I would just run by the home office, and I could go down to the first floor and call up to through the operator, could call up to the desk. Of course, you could do that during COVID, and say, hey, I'm dropping off something for you. Do you mind grabbing it? And guess what? They would come down. And next thing you know, we started having a conversation in the lobby. And with this one particular buyer, it was like an hour later, we're just sitting there talking, having a great conversation. I was able to hand in my slides and he'll see that. Well, I digress a little bit, but the reason I tell you that is this person now went on to be a CEO, chief merchandising officer of a very large chain, and then on to be a CEO. He's very successful today. And I guess it's part of it. He was a great, good people person, and he loved to dialogue and listen and engage. But I'll never forget one time I was cringing. I was with Coca Cola, and I had, these brand people flying in, and they came in and had this big study, and they were insistent that I schedule it. They wanted a 2-hour meeting with the buyer, and he looked at me like, no. He said, the most I can give you is 30 minutes. And I'm like, oh, they're pushing me. If you work for a big company, you get it. It's their, oh no, you need this, you need that. Or you could be a small company, but you got a pesky boss that doesn't understand the buyer, and he's telling you, no, you need to go, and I want you to share this. Bottom line, my friend, who now the CEO, said at the time, he said, okay, they were walking him through it, and they got to about 25 minutes into it, and he said, you know what, time out. He said, this is really nice that y'all were spending all this money and getting all these insights. He goes, and that's great. He said, but at the end of the day, what am I going to do with it? He said, how do you make it actionable for me? How is it going to help me? How's it going to help my business? I don't care how many people you surveyed. I don't care that you got this and the other thing. At the end of the day, great data, but how's it going to help me sell more stuff? And that was so telling. I have to admit, I was laughing inside because I kept trying to tell them going into it, they don't want to hear all this stuff, right? And I'm sure some of you sitting out there laughing right now because you've been through this before when you're trying to tell a stubborn boss or somebody who really doesn't understand the buyer that, oh yeah, they'll be impressed if we go in. And I've had a buyer once tell it that he hates it when suppliers would show up and throw up. So again, don't be one of those. Use your size to be able to bring in with passion and have a dialogue. Don't lecture to them and don't read a bunch of data to them. So let's go back let's talk a little bit more about the competitive landscape. So I already showed you a little bit of the IRI data, all right? But regardless if you have it or not, I'd like to kind of walk you through a little exercise that I always encourage you to do, and do it with your internal teams. And may your internal team be 2 people or 20 people or however big it is. When you really want to make sure that you're going in with the winning solution, you're going to plot out. Let's say you don't have IRI data, so you want to just go in and take pictures of the set and go back and analyze it together. You're going to look at basically a chart this simple. And it's as easy as talking about the 4 Ps. And it is that basic, right? And you guys know that because, again, being a successful small company, you're really, instead of getting focused on the wrong things that are sometimes so far out of scope for a retailer, you're focused on the things they're focused on, which is price, product, packaging, and placement. That's simple, right? And so who's winning and why? And that's what it tells you. So what all this does is basically these different colors are retailers. So let's say, or your product, excuse me. So let's say this is your product, and you're going to look at where you're priced compared to how everybody else is priced. And you're going to say up here, okay, we're higher priced. You're going to be higher up in this quadrant. And then if you look at, let's say your placement of your product on the shelf, high up, we've got a great placement. This is a really strength of ours. When we look at our packaging, gee, it's clean, it cuts the clutter, it really says our message properly, I love it, versus our competitor. So you're basically just plotting out. And so you start with yours and then drop in your other key competitors, the people that are winning in your category, and do a little bit of analysis like this on, when I look at this competitor, C2 and C1, and look at their product. Why is their product better? Okay, you know what? Their bars are all natural and ours are not. And we know that consumers today are kind of looking for less sugar and all natural. All right. It could be something like that. So a lot of it really has to do with maybe we don't have enough variety. Maybe we only have the one SKU and we need 2 or 3 to make some kind of presence on the shelf. So this is the kind of dialogue I recommend strongly before you go into a meeting and before you go in and to think that you're going to kick the big guys out of the way, is you're going to just do this simple exercise. And I will assure you, if you can go in and make sure that you're winning in each of these quadrants. And again, when I say price, you have a high price, it's okay. Because if you're going to go in and you're going to say, we are going to be the premium in the category, and there's a good, better, best, you're going to say that's fine, because also my price, instead of trying to trade them up a whole 50 cents, maybe it's only 25 cents higher, depending on, let's say, if it was per bar or something like that. So it's about it's not really about you're higher than everybody else. In this case, it really should say price value. Okay, so it's really about, because obviously if you're bringing a all natural, low sugar, all natural product in compostable packaging, right? Or whatever the case may be, or some kind of consumer user-free packaging. That's a big value. So of course you're going to be priced higher. So remember, this is more like price value. And then again, placement, where you're placed on the shelf in each retailer, or where you would shoot to be. Your packaging really important. Do you have the right size? Do you have the right graphics? Do you have the right message to cut through the clutter? And again, the last would be the type of product you're offering. All right, and my last, and certainly my favorite here. I get passionate about this one because when you've been beat up with big companies for 30 years, and you get so frustrated at the end. This was again another quote from a buyer friend of mine that used to say when some of my brand folks would walk out, it's like, you know what? Don't get caught up in your own exhaust. And that meaning basically big companies can come in, or even any of us can be guilty of this, where your product is the best thing since sliced bread. And that's all you can talk about is how great it is, and you've done everything perfectly. And why that is so dangerous is, just like you see in this visual, is you can't see the forest for the trees because you are so caught up in your product, your company, you're this. It's really hard to be objective. It's really hard to see it from the lens of the buyer, to see it from the lens of the consumer. So, again, when you hear, and I'm sure all of you've heard this phrase before, can't get out of their own way. If I've heard that one time in my 30 years, I've heard it, I swear, once a week. Big companies, and I lived it, can't get out. They say this all the time. And when I was with Coca Cola, and now I'm working for a smaller isotonic company, I'll never forget this buyer saying, you know what? I want you guys to win because this XYZ, which was by far the category leader, said they can't get out of their own way. Meaning the buyer would say, hey, I hear my shoppers. I get this feedback all the time from them. They want the rings holding the 8-pack together in the bottles to be more user friendly, whatever it may be. Big companies just say, we can't do that. It's the way it is. But guess what? As a smaller company, you can say, hey, you know what? Let me go back and look at that. Let me talk to our packaging folks. Let me talk to the R&D. Let's go see. I mean, you're not committing to saying, yeah, we'll make that happen. But what you're saying is, hey, I hear you. You're listening, and you're willing to change. And I've had CEOs and presidents that are so scared to say that, like, yeah, let me go back and look. So they'll go, no. They may hear me say that I'm going to go do it, and what if I can't? And they hold me to it. Guys, there's no such thing. There's no such thing. There's never, ever, ever any fear in saying, hey, I hear you. Let me go talk to our folks internally. That's all you're committing to. But it's okay to say, give me some examples of things you're thinking about, Mr. Buyer, that you want to change, or how, let me take that back to our team. Or even, I have no idea, but I'll take that back. And to me, that's one of the really beautiful parts of a smaller company. And I would say probably the number one thing, this very last slide is number one that you can do to take advantage. And why, I've literally had companies that a buyer bought because they did not want the big guys to get any bigger. Because the bigger the big guys get, they're losing control, right? They're losing control over, because all of a sudden they're dominating their set, they're dominating their sales. So they want the small guys to win. But if you go in and your branding, if you're a brand manager, if you're sales for whatever part you play on that team, or maybe you're both, you've got to be able to listen. And again, I go back to buyers, especially in big retailers. You think of Walmart, for example. Buyers have this one area, like just snack bars, for example, just dried fruit and raisins, just milk, just pizza, right? So they are so honed in on your category. They have people coming from all over the world, bringing them insights and sharing stories and feedback and consumer information. They're getting it from their store managers. They're getting it from their shoppers. So trust me, as much as you think you may know about your product, your category, they know as much, if not more. I literally had a honey supplier, came over from New Zealand, one of the oldest honey companies in the world. And this person super, super smart VP of marketing, knew everybody about honey, been in the honey business his whole life, and knew just about everything. And I'll never forget him turning to me after we walked out of our 25-minute line review. And he said to me, I'm shocked how much this buyer knew about honey. He said, I've never had a meeting where a buyer knew as much as I did, if not more. And he was just taken back. And I just say that as an extreme, but it's a true example of these large companies. Again, they're meeting hundreds of people like you every week, and they're getting insights thrown at them everywhere. So I just can't stress enough how important it is to really listen. And I have an example here where I said, do you really need that expensive compostable packaging? This is a true story where this particular company had a president that just said, I think it's all about compostable packaging. Well, maybe in that little corner up in the northeast of the country, that's real important. But if you're going to want to sell more than, just that little piece of the country, and for some reason they got caught up thinking this is really, really important. Well, all of a sudden it took the cost of the product up by like 25% because it was so expensive. And the buyer kept saying all along, we had like 3 different line reviews over the 2.5 years. And every time he'd say, I just really don't think you need that. It's maybe a nice to have, but how much do people really care about it? And you know what? Now, fast forward to here we are today. Guess what? New leader in town at this company, and the compostable packaging's gone. And the price came down significantly. And now we've got a really good story of where that product, we can trade people up, but in a reasonable way up and not this far up because of a feature on their product that really wasn't that important. But again, where you're going to get caught up in your own exhaust, there was certain agendas that felt like, no, it's just a must. It's a must. So I know I've gone on and on a lot about that, but as you can tell, I'm passionate about it. So last two things I'd leave you with is be open to test and learn. Again, another big advantage of a small company. It doesn't have to be a fancy test. You don't have to go hire some big thing. You could say, hey, I want to go into a couple of your Walmarts and I want to go talk to some of your shoppers. I mean, it could be that simple, right? You could set up a demo with a demo company and use that to ask questions, and for like $100 a day. I mean, you could do it as something as that simple. So be willing to test and learn. Big retailers really love that, and they know that. Again, at your size, the fact that you're willing to be more flexible and listen to their feedback, that will go a very long way. And then lastly, and I know you've all heard this before, but check your ego at the door. And again, that goes back to no matter how sophisticated someone thinks they are and know how much they know about honey, the fact that he could be humble enough to say, wow, this person knew as much, if not more than I did, that was pretty cool. Where more times than not with the big companies, they walk out, they're going, oh, that buyer don't know what they're talking about. Da, 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 da. Well, again, best thing of advice, if you check your ego at the door, you'll find that your listening skills become a lot better also. And again, I say if you took nothing else out of this, because some of it was somewhat academic, I'd really say take this slide, take these bullet points, and really process it, because this is really where you're going to find your sweet spot as a small company.